Alien shocked. You captured human children? Are you insane? HFY sci-fi story. The space station Viracor was a marvel of intergalactic design, a sprawling city in orbit around a distant star. Its corridors hummed with the activity of countless species, each contributing to the vast network of trade and knowledge that spanned the galaxy. But now, in one of the darker, more secluded sectors of the station, a group of aliens stood in disbelief, staring at the humans in front of them. How could you do this? The Zorasian captain, Vrolk, growled, his 7 eyes wide with shock. His voice trembled slightly as he processed the scene before him. The humans were imprisoned, but there was something different about them. They were children, barely more than infants in terms of their species' lifespan. Their tiny hands were pressed against the transparent walls of their holding cells, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The aliens around them, members of a species known for their ruthlessness and cold pragmatism, seemed visibly shaken by what they were witnessing. You captured children? Vrolk repeated, almost in a whisper. Yes, replied a voice from the shadows. It belonged to a tall, broad-shouldered figure, a member of a species that had never before interacted with humans. His name was Erix, and his species, the Ataru, were well known for their strategic genius and brutal efficiency in warfare. He was an anomaly among his kind, known for his obsession with human culture. He had even been known to praise their strange sense of morality, which he considered a weakness in his own species. Now, however, Erix was beginning to see the flaws in his thinking. We captured them because they're a valuable commodity, Erix said, his voice betraying a slight tremor. Humans are valuable for their ability to adapt quickly, their resilience, their creativity. The Council of Planets is willing to pay handsomely for them. Vrolk stared at Erix, then at the children in the cells. The concept of capturing such a young, vulnerable species was foreign to him. Zoraxians were warriors, but they valued strength above all. Weakness was to be exploited, not preserved. You can't be serious, Vrolk spat. The humans are children. You don't understand. They're not just a commodity. They're a force of nature. Their resilience, their tenacity, even as young as they are. They'll fight. They'll resist. You will not control them. If you try, they'll destroy everything. The Ataru captain's words echoed in the tense silence that followed. Vrolk took a deep breath, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. He had heard the legends, of course, the stories of how humanity had single-handedly changed the course of galactic history, but he had never truly believed it. After all, the humans were a young species, barely out of their primitive state. They were still trapped in their own petty conflicts on their homeworld. But now, staring at the children behind the glass, Vrolk saw something that made his skin crawl. You're insane, Vrolk said, his voice heavy with disbelief. These children will grow, and when they do, they will come for you, and they won't stop until every last one of you is wiped from the face of the galaxy. You don't understand what you've unleashed. The humans? The humans what? Erix interrupted, stepping forward. They will resist, sure, but they are children. What can they do? This is our territory. You have no idea what we're capable of. Vrolk's eyes narrowed, his 7 pupils narrowing in on Erix. He had fought in countless battles, witnessed entire worlds fall, but he had also seen the power of the humans. No matter the odds, they would rise. Don't you see? Vrolk's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. The humans are like a fire. They'll start small, but if you don't stamp them out now, that fire will spread, and it will consume you all. You're not dealing with just a species. You're dealing with something that can turn the tide of the galaxy, something that cannot be controlled, something you should never have underestimated. Erix stared at Vrolk, his mind racing. The words seemed to hang in the air like a storm cloud, ominous and heavy. You captured children, thinking they were just weak, helpless creatures, Vrolk continued, but they are human, and that's the last mistake you'll ever make. For the first time, Erix doubted his actions. He looked at the children in their cells. They were small, but their eyes were not afraid. In fact, there was something unsettling about their quiet determination. They weren't broken. They weren't defeated. Vrolk's voice lowered to a growl. You should release them, while you still have the chance. Erix's heart pounded. The Ataru, ruthless and logical as they were, prided themselves on their calculated control. But Vrolk's words were sinking in. The humans had never been controlled. They were a species built on resistance, on overcoming odds, on survival, and now, they were beginning to understand that the galaxy had underestimated them. With a slow, deliberate motion, Eric's turned toward the control panel. He had the power to keep the children locked away, but now, for the first time, he wasn't so sure he should. The choice was his. And as he stood there, the future of an entire galaxy seemed to hang in the balance. Would the humans be silenced, or would they rise up, as they always had, and change everything? Eric's wasn't certain, but he could feel the fire of humanity's spirit burning brighter than ever before. And it scared him. As the children moved through the corridors of the Viracore, a strange silence hung in the air. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from stillness, but rather the kind that arises when a storm is brewing. The other species aboard the station, the Vira, the Vorn, the Drac, watched them cautiously, unsure of how to respond. These were the same species that had once looked down on humanity, seen them as little more than primitive creatures struggling to survive on their own world. But now, as they saw the young humans walking unafraid, eyes blazing with a quiet power, they began to realize that their perceptions were wrong. The children moved with purpose, each step calculated and deliberate, as though they already knew the path to take, and that nothing could stop them. They weren't lost, they weren't afraid, they weren't prisoners. And neither were the humans who had been taken before. In an instant, the humans, children and adults alike, began to awaken. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The prisoners, who had once slumped in their cells, heads bowed in resignation, now stood tall, feeling the fire of defiance flicker within them. The Vorn, a species known for their intelligence but also for their passivity, began to murmur among themselves, sensing something powerful in the air. One of the older humans, a man named Declan, approached the control center of the station. He was a veteran of many battles, a soldier in the resistance against alien occupation on Earth. His eyes, once clouded with the despair of captivity, now burned with a renewed sense of purpose. He had seen the spark in the children's eyes, and he understood what it meant. Eric's watched them, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just a group of escapees anymore. This was a movement. They're organizing, he whispered to Vrolk, who stood beside him. You don't see it, do you? They're not just running, they're planning, and when they do, it'll be impossible to stop them. Vrolk's face contorted with frustration. How? They're children. You're telling me we're afraid of children? Eric's turned to face the captain, his expression grim. You should be. You don't understand the depth of what humanity is capable of. They're not like other species. They won't just flee. They will turn this station into a battleground if they have to. The tension in the air was palpable. The children, now free from their cells, were gathering together, speaking in hushed tones, their plans forming. It wasn't long before the first sparks of resistance appeared. One by one, the other prisoners, humans and non-humans alike, began to align themselves with the children's cause. The quiet whispers grew louder, and the station seemed to hold its breath. Don't let them unite, Vrolk growled, his eyes scanning the growing crowd. Shut this down, Eric's. Do it now. But Eric's, though still uncertain, hesitated. His hand hovered above the controls, the familiar impulse to maintain order warring with the strange feeling that had taken root in his chest. He had always been the one to command, to dominate, to keep the balance. But now, seeing the humans gather, seeing the hope burning in their eyes, he realized something he hadn't before. He had underestimated them. The humans had never been just survivors. They were builders, they were fighters, and in the depths of their desperation, they could create something no empire could ever destroy. They could inspire revolutions, and, worse yet, they could make others believe in their cause. Please, Eric's muttered under his breath, release the humans, all of them, now. Vrolk's eyes widened in disbelief. You're insane. This station is the heart of the Ataru's control over this sector. You'll ruin everything. I already have, Eric's replied softly, and it's too late to stop it now. In that moment, the children, led by Declan, made their move. They had infiltrated the station's communication systems, and soon every alien aboard the Viracore would hear their message. Declan, with a calm resolve, activated the broadcast. Attention, all stations within this sector. Declan's voice echoed across the loudspeakers. It was a voice like no other, clear, strong, and filled with the weight of determination. You have taken our children. You have captured us. You have stolen our future. But no more. We are humanity, and we will no longer be your prisoners. The words spread like wildfire, reverberating through the station. The aliens, who had once seen humans as insignificant, now found themselves staring into the heart of an insurrection they couldn't begin to understand. Their faces hardened, but there was fear in their eyes. Fear of the unknown. Fear of what humanity was capable of. We don't need your approval, Declan continued. We don't need your technology. We don't need your permission. You have given us a choice, and we've made it. Now, we will take back what is ours. Our freedom. Our future. There was a pause, a heartbeat of silence, before the entire station seemed to tremble. Something was happening. Something had begun that could not be undone. Across the station, the other prisoners, both human and alien, began to riot. The Vera, once the guards of the station, now found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer numbers and resolve of those they had subjugated. The children, once helpless and afraid, now led the charge, their innocent faces a symbol of something far greater. They were no longer pawns in a game of galactic politics. They were warriors, driven by something more powerful than any weapon, a shared will to survive, to resist, to fight for freedom. In the heart of the station, Eric's watched in awe as the impossible unfolded before him. He had seen wars, uprisings, and insurrections, but nothing like this. The humans had turned the tables with the precision of a master tactician and the determination of an unstoppable force. And for the first time in his life, Eric's realized that it wasn't just about power or control. It was about something deeper, something that even the most powerful species in the galaxy could not fight. It was about hope, the spark that humanity carried with them, the spark that no empire could ever extinguish. The fire had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. As the chaos spread across the Vera core, the once formidable fortress of the Ataru Empire began to crumble. The station's once immaculate halls, lined with gleaming technology and alien decor, were now filled with the sounds of uprising, shouting, clashing, and the unmistakable thrum of resistance. Humanity, led by its children, had ignited a revolution. The children, once held in cells, were now leading the charge through the corridors, their small forms moving with a purpose far beyond their years. They had learned from the adults around them, survival wasn't just about strength. It was about outsmarting your captors, finding the weak points, and exploiting them. They had grown up in a world where every day was a fight for survival, and now, they were turning that experience into action. Move, move, Declan shouted, his voice cutting through the madness. He had joined the children in the front lines, though his role was less about guiding them and more about being their shield. He had seen what they were capable of, and now it was his turn to protect them. As the children advanced, his soldiers, human prisoners who had long lost hope, rallied behind him. Vrolk, still in shock, stood at the heart of the command center, watching the unfolding disaster. He had never seen anything like it. The humans, children and adults alike, were methodical, fearless, and utterly relentless. They had transformed the station into a battleground, and every alien who tried to stop them found themselves outmatched. They can't be this organized, Vrolk muttered, his voice tinged with desperation. How are they doing this? Eric's stood motionless beside him, his eyes glued to the chaos unfolding. He had never believed in the myths, the stories of humans overcoming insurmountable odds. But now, as he watched them dismantle the Ataru's grip on the station piece by piece, he felt a deep unease. They are doing what they've always done, Eric's replied, his voice low, surviving, adapting, but most of all, they're united. You underestimate them, Vrolk. They are not just a species, they are a movement, and once they're galvanized, there is no stopping them. But they're children, Vrolk insisted, shaking his head in disbelief. You keep talking about unity, but they're just kids. How can they rally the others like this? Eric sighed, rubbing his temple as he stared at the holographic map of the station. The network of corridors and chambers was alive with movement. Human prisoners and children alike were systematically disabling security systems, freeing the rest of the captives, and outsmarting the Ataru soldiers at every turn. Do you know what human children do when they are cornered? Eric's asked, his voice calm but filled with an eerie understanding. They fight. They don't just sit and wait to be rescued. They lead. Vrolk narrowed his eyes, as if searching for an explanation he couldn't grasp. Eric's turned back to him, his expression unreadable. These children have seen the worst the universe can offer, Eric's continued. Their world was torn apart. They watched their people enslaved, their homes destroyed, and yet, they didn't break. They grew stronger. And now they are leading their own revolution. The control center was no longer a place of command. It had become a fortress under siege. The doors burst open as a group of humans, led by a young girl no older than 11, stormed in, armed with stolen Ataru weapons. They moved like shadows, fast and efficient, knowing exactly what needed to be done. Vrolk's soldiers, who had been trained for decades in the art of war, were now scrambling to keep up. The girl, her face grim but determined, aimed her weapon at the control panel and fired. Sparks flew from the machine, and the station-wide alarm began to blare, signaling that the station's central systems were failing. Retreat, Vrolk barked, panic creeping into his voice. He could feel the walls closing in. We need to regain control. But it was too late. The children, with their uncanny ability to navigate the station's systems, had already disabled all key communications and security measures. The Ataru were losing control, and with every passing moment, their empire was slipping through their fingers. How did they do this? Vrolk breathed, barely able to comprehend the scene around him. His empire, his station, had been brought to its knees by children. Erix watched the young girl as she stood over the control panel, surveying the damage. She was calm, unshaken by the chaos surrounding her. There was no fear in her eyes, only determination. And as Erix looked at her, something inside him shifted. They didn't just survive. Vrolk, Erix said, his voice soft, almost reverent. They thrived. And now they're showing you what happens when you underestimate them. Vrolk's expression hardened. You think we've lost? Then? I think, Erix said slowly, his gaze never leaving the girl, that you've made a terrible mistake. You've underestimated humanity. And that mistake will cost us everything. The battle raged on for hours, and yet the humans showed no signs of slowing down. The Ataru were fierce, but they lacked the single most important thing the humans possessed, unity. While the Ataru soldiers fought as individuals, the humans fought as a collective, with a single purpose. They had one goal, and they would stop at nothing to achieve it. In the central command chamber, Declan and his team fought their way to the final control panel. The Ataru were retreating, but it wasn't enough. The station was still functional, and there were still pockets of resistance. Declan knew they had to shut it down completely. Declan, the core is still online, one of the humans warned. We need to disable the central engine or this place will just be a new stronghold for them. Declan nodded grimly. Then we destroy it. We finish what we started. But just as they approached the core, an unexpected voice interrupted their plans. Erix appeared, standing at the entrance, his face grave. I won't stop you, Erix said, his tone surprisingly calm. I've already seen enough. But understand this, when you take control of this station, you take on the responsibility for everything that follows. The galaxy will notice, and they won't forgive you for what you've done. Declan paused, his fingers hovering over the control panel. He met Erix's gaze, seeing the conflict in his eyes. We're not here for forgiveness, Declan replied, his voice steady. We're here for freedom, and we won't stop until we have it. Erix didn't respond immediately. He only nodded slowly, stepping aside. He had made his choice, and now, humanity had made theirs. The final command was given. The station's core shut down with a deafening roar, and the Vera core went dark. The lights flickered and died, and for the first time in decades, the Ataru lost their stronghold. The fire had spread, and now, it was unstoppable. The galaxy would burn. The darkened Vera core shuddered as its systems began to fail. The once pristine corridors, filled with the hum of Ataru technology, now echoed with the distant sounds of chaos and triumph. The station had fallen silent, its central core offline, its communications severed, its security systems disabled. The Ataru had lost control, and the humans, children, prisoners, and soldiers alike had seized their moment. They had won. But the battle was far from over. Declan stood at the heart of the station's main control room, looking out over the viewports. Beyond the shattered windows, he could see the distant stars, the vast, cold emptiness of space. It was beautiful, but it was also a stark reminder of what they had taken. This was no longer a prison, it was a symbol of their newfound power. We've done it, said one of the soldiers, his voice weary but triumphant. He lowered his weapon, a look of disbelief crossing his face as the weight of their victory settled in. We've actually done it. Declan nodded, but there was no joy in his expression. He had fought in countless battles, had seen the destruction and the loss that came with each victory. The cost of freedom was always high. But this was different. The galaxy would never forget what they had done today. Don't get complacent, Declan said, his voice steady but tinged with caution. We may have taken the Vera core, but there are others like it. The Ataru Empire won't sit idly by. This will spark a war. We'll be ready for it. Another voice replied, a younger human who had been freed from the cells. We've already beaten them once. We can do it again. Declan turned to look at the child, her eyes bright with unshakable confidence. He had seen that same fire in the eyes of the other children. The same fire that had carried them through the chaos of their captivity. They were no longer the frightened kids they had been when they first arrived. They were warriors now, leaders in the making. Maybe, Declan said, his tone softening, but we need to prepare for what's coming. This fight isn't over. The Ataru will rally, and they won't hesitate to send everything they have at us. We need to make our stand. As he spoke, he saw Eric step into the room, his expression somber. The Ataru captain had watched the humans take the station, had seen their resolve, and now he stood at the center of it all, no longer an enemy, but a witness to their rise. You've done it, Eric said quietly, his voice heavy with resignation. The Ataru will never forgive this. You've ignited something bigger than you know. Declan didn't reply at first. He simply regarded Eric's, his gaze unwavering. The alien captain had once been their captor, their jailer. Now, he was a bystander, a figure of the past. The station was no longer under the control of the Ataru, and its future was uncertain. You're right, Declan finally said, his voice cold but resolute. But you know as well as I do that it's too late. The fire is out of the cage. There's no going back. Eric's didn't argue. He understood that as much as anyone. The Ataru had underestimated humanity, and now, in the wake of their defeat, they would be forced to reckon with the consequences. You think the galaxy will change? Eric's asked, his voice tinged with a hint of skepticism. You think they'll follow you? Humans are powerful, but there are far more of us than there are of you. Declan's lips twitched into a grim smile. Maybe, but that's the thing about humans, Eric's. We don't fight just to win. We fight for something more. Eric stared at him for a moment, as if trying to grasp the weight of what he had just said. Then, finally, he nodded, a grudging respect passing between them. I suppose I was wrong, Eric muttered, more to himself than anyone else. I underestimated you. Declan didn't respond. He didn't need to. They both knew the truth now. Humanity had risen, not just in battle, but in spirit, in unity, and in the undeniable force of will that had carried them from the ashes of their own world to the heart of the Ataru Empire. As the seconds ticked by, the reality of what they had accomplished began to sink in. The Vera Corps was theirs, but the war was far from over. They had broken the chains that had bound them, but now they would have to face the consequences of that freedom. The galaxy was watching. The Ataru would regroup, and they would send their armies to reclaim what was lost. Other empires, other factions, would rise to challenge them, to test the strength of this new force. But humanity had already proven something that would change the balance of power forever. They had proven that no matter how far they were pushed, no matter how broken they became, they would always rise, and they would always fight. Days passed, and the humans aboard the Vera Corps began to solidify their hold on the station. They repaired the systems, reprogrammed the weapons, and organized into groups, each taking responsibility for a different part of the station. They were no longer just survivors. They were strategists, engineers, soldiers. They were a force to be reckoned with. The children who had once been imprisoned were now leaders. They had learned quickly, taking up roles as messengers, tacticians, and even diplomats. They spoke to the other prisoners, aliens from every corner of the galaxy who had been trapped in the Ataru's web, and rallied them to their cause. One by one, the Ataru's former captives pledged their loyalty to the human cause. It was no longer just a human fight. It was a fight for freedom, for equality, for the right to exist without the chains of oppression. But it wasn't just the humans and their allies who were making moves. Far away, in the dark reaches of space, the Ataru began to regroup. The loss of the Vera Corps was a blow, but it was not the end. They would rebuild. They would launch their counterattack. And they would remember the humans who had defied them. The fires of rebellion were spreading. It wasn't long before the first wave of reinforcements arrived, ships from the Ataru Empire, massive and heavily armed. But the humans were ready. They had learned from their mistakes, and now they had the resources and the resolve to stand firm. Declan stood at the bridge of the Vera Corps, gazing out at the incoming fleet. His crew, a mix of humans and freed captives, prepared for the worst. He could feel the weight of what was about to happen, the inevitability of the clash, but he wasn't afraid. The galaxy was about to learn one undeniable truth. Humanity was no longer just surviving. They were conquering. And no empire, no matter how vast, could ever stand in their way again.